Aryan and Kabir, two best friends, were always drawn to adventure. On a warm, sunny afternoon, they decided to visit the lake on the edge of their quiet village. The villagers rarely went there, believing the lake to be cursed, but the boys dismissed such superstitions. The lake, shimmering under the sunlight and surrounded by towering trees, seemed like the perfect place to spend the day. As they waded into the cool water, laughing and splashing, Aryan's foot brushed against something solid. He stopped, curious, and bent down to investigate. Beneath the water, buried in the sand, was a small, silver ring. He pulled it out and held it up for Kabir to see. The ring was old, tarnished, and engraved with strange, intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the light. "Where do you think this came from?" Aryan asked, turning it over in his hands. "Who knows? Maybe it's treasure." Kabir grinned. "You should keep it. It's your lucky find." Aryan hesitated. Something about the ring felt strange. But Kabir's enthusiasm was contagious, and Aryan finally slipped the ring into his pocket. "All right," he said, "but let's not tell anyone about it. It'll be our secret." Kabir nodded, and the boys continued to play. But Aryan couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As the sun began to set, they packed up and started the walk home, the forest growing darker and quieter with every step. That night, Aryan placed the ring on his bedside table. Though it was just a small object, it felt heavy, as if it carried an unseen weight. He tried to sleep, but his mind kept drifting back to the lake and the strange patterns on the ring. In the middle of the night, Aryan woke suddenly, startled by the sensation of cold water dripping onto his forehead. He sat up, his heart racing, and touched his skin. It was damp. But when he looked around the room, everything was dry. The ceiling showed no signs of a leak, and the air was still. "Must have been a dream," Aryan mumbled to himself, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He lay back down, but the moment he closed his eyes, his dreams carried him back to the lake. The water was unnaturally still under a pale moon, and the air was thick and heavy. Aryan stood at the shore, confused and uneasy. Then he saw Kabir, standing at the water's edge with his back to him. "Come here," Kabir said, his voice calm but distant. "The water is so clear and fresh. Let's swim." Aryan hesitated. Something about Kabir's voice and posture seemed wrong. He turned to leave, but no matter how far he walked, he always ended up back at the same spot, facing the lake. Kabir was still there, waiting, his voice calling again. "Come on, Aryan, don't you trust me?" Fear gripped Aryan as Kabir began to turn around. Aryan stood frozen as Kabir slowly turned to face him. His heart pounded in his chest as the boy he had known his entire life was no longer human. Kabir's face was twisted into something grotesque. His mouth had elongated into a gaping, fish-like maw lined with sharp teeth. His eyes were dark, hollow voids, and his skin had taken on a slimy, scaly texture. "Kabir!" Aryan whispered, his voice trembling. Kabir grinned, his distorted features stretching unnaturally. "Why are you afraid? Don't you trust me?" His voice was warped, a guttural echo that sent shivers down Aryan's spine. Aryan tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if the ground beneath him was pulling him back. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't escape the lake's edge. "Kabir, stop!" Aryan shouted, tears streaming down his face. Kabir, or the creature wearing his face, stepped closer, his body moving with unnatural fluidity. The air grew colder, and the surface of the lake rippled as if something enormous stirred beneath it. "Come into the water," Kabir said, extending a webbed hand. "It's where you belong now." Aryan's body moved against his will. His feet stepped forward, inching closer to the dark water. "No, let me go," he screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the night. As his toes touched the icy water, Aryan's mind screamed in terror. He looked into Kabir's hollow eyes and saw something vast and ancient, a presence that had been waiting for centuries beneath the lake. It was no longer just Kabir. It was the entity that the villagers feared, the curse they had whispered about for generations. The water rose around him, pulling him deeper and deeper. Kabir's monstrous grin was the last thing Aryan saw before the world went dark. The next morning, the villagers gathered at the lake, their faces pale with fear. Floating on the water was Aryan's lifeless body. His face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror. "It's happened again," one elder said grimly. "The lake has claimed another." The villagers whispered about the cursed waters and the ancient entity that dwelled within. Kabir was never seen again, and the ring that Aryan had found was nowhere to be found. Aryan's parents wept inconsolably, their cries echoing through the silent village. The lake shimmered under the morning sun, deceptively peaceful, as if it were mocking them. What secrets does the lake hold? Could this tragedy have been prevented? This concludes the story of the Whispering Lake. Subscribe for more chilling tales, and remember, some things are better left undisturbed.